Hello everyone. Today I feel like sharing about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which forms the fundamentals in Buddhism, and regardless of which schools of Buddhism you practice, these are fundamentals in Buddha's teaching and it forms Buddha's earliest teaching. So in Theravada Buddhism, it says this was the Buddha's first teaching. But in Mahayana Buddhism, it's said that when Buddha obtained enlightenment by sitting under the Bodhi Tree for 49 days, for those 21 days, Buddha was actually expounding Dharma to the heavenly realm, the heavenly beings, to those high level of bodhisattvas about sort of his complete state of enlightenment, because only those beings would be able to understand. And the first sutra he expounded was actually the Avataṃsaka Sūtra, which reveals the whole of what's Buddha's ultimate level of enlightenment like, and Buddha's cosmology, and all those sort of deep questions. But of course, Buddha did not teach that straight away to us, because we would not be able to understand. And that's why Buddha first, when he came out from his meditation after 49 days under the Bodhi Tree, he first went to his very earliest 5 disciples and teach the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path in very simple language. So I actually have a collection of the Avataṃsaka Sūtra here. There are only 80 chapters that are available in our human realm, unfortunately. And it says this only forms a very tiny bit of the entire Avataṃsaka Sūtra. And the reason why they're not available in the human realm is because no one would be able to understand it in its entirety, and no one would actually have the time to study it due to how large the amount of work is. That is why Buddha rarely talks about what happens to people after enlightenment. Also at that time, Buddha did not answer questions like whether the universe is infinite or finite, whether there is a beginning or end. Those kind of questions Buddha did not answer. It's not because Buddha did not know. Buddha, for enlightened being, he knows about everything. But he had no interest to sort of tell these things to others if they could not understand, or if they will lead them into perhaps forming more questions and being more sort of trapped in the mind. Imagine if the Buddha, after enlightenment, he came out and talked about this multiverse, talk about Amitabha Buddha. Yes, he knew about Amitabha Buddha. He knew about gaining rebirth to the Pure Land at that time, of course, because in the Avataṃsaka Sutra, we'll see that the last chapter was about all the bodhisattvas who suggest to all gain rebirth to the Pure Land. But he would not just come out and talk about this, because no one would be able to sort of first believe him or understood what he was talking about. So each Dharma has their time in when Buddha would teach to others. That's why the very first earliest Buddhist teaching are very simple and straightforward, and we can see in the Theravada school of Buddhism. And then after that, later, Buddha eased into more sort of difficult concepts such as the shunyata, the emptiness, which forms the main teaching in Mahayana Buddhism. So at the beginning, Buddha talks a lot about suffering, how we can liberate from suffering. And then later on, we did not hear Buddha speaks about suffering so much. Rather, he talks more about emptiness, how all dharmas are emptiness, etc., which we will explain in another video. So Buddha's teaching is a bit like a school. First, we need to graduate from primary school in order to get into middle school, and then to high school, to university, and perhaps even to PhD. So it was a bit like that when the Buddha expounded Dharma. So Buddha was incredibly wise in how he spread Dharma. He will only give us what is necessary for us in this moment and not go into too much in the concepts. And also, if we really look at the Buddha's teaching, we'll know that Buddha actually did not invent anything. What Buddha said was actually the truth. But what Buddha did was actually to sort of organize them in a systematic way that it's easy for us to understand. Actually, the essence of Buddhism is not religion, and it's not even philosophy. When we think about philosophy, philosophy could be a product of the mind. But Buddhism is really about Buddha's deeply lived experience. It's about Buddha's awareness with the nature of reality. And Buddha is like a scientist of the mind that reveals the true nature of the mind. So first, the Four Noble Truths. First, Buddha told us there is suffering. We all know that there is suffering in life, but we rarely think about what exactly caused the suffering, what exactly is the root of suffering. Also, we rarely think about how we could actually eliminate all the sufferings in life. But Buddha offers this to us. And Buddha told us there is suffering in life, which forms the first noble truth. So what kind of suffering? Buddha mentioned about 8 types of suffering. First, birth is suffering. And we may like, why is birth suffering? Birth is a celebration, right? But for the baby and even for the mother, it's actually a lot of suffering. It's a painful process. And it's said in the Buddha Sutra, when a baby was first in the mother's womb for those 10 months, if the mother drinks a glass of cold water, the baby will feel like he was incredibly freezing, as if he was in a type of hell that was extremely chilly. And if the mother drank a glass of hot water, the baby would feel like he was in a type of hell that was burning. So for the baby, it was actually a lot of suffering for those 10 months being in the mother's womb. And that was why when the baby first came out, all babies were crying hysterically. We rarely see any baby who actually smile or laugh into this world, but all of them were crying. It was a painful process to drag this tiny little body from this tiny hole. So we could imagine how painful it was, and also for the mother. But for us, we forget about it very quickly. So birth is suffering, old age is suffering. We all know that, especially as women, we don't want to grow old. Perhaps no one sort of want to grow old. That is why the cosmetic industry will never go broke, because all the women want to keep their youth and beauty. So old age is a type of suffering. Illness is suffering. We've seen, especially nowadays, a lot of people get sick, people get a virus and then they die from the virus. So illness is suffering, a lot of suffering. And death is suffering. This one goes without saying. Also, separation with loved one is suffering. No one wants to be separated from our loved ones. And to not be able to get what we want is suffering. Also, to be together with people who we dislike are also suffering. So there are all these different types of suffering in our life. But thankfully, Buddha did not just stop there. And Buddha went on to tell us there is the origin to the suffering. So the suffering has a cause. The suffering does not just come out of nowhere. Rather, there is a cause, there is an origin to the suffering, which Buddha talks about. Everything in this world is dependent arising, so it's suffering. If we experience suffering, it's because there is a cause to this suffering. And Buddha told us very straightforward, the cause of suffering is our craving, our attachment to desire. So whenever we experience some kind of suffering, there must be that we have attachment to something or to someone that causes us this type of suffering. And that is why Buddha is really like the best, perhaps, psychologist in this. So Buddha actually helps us to examine the truth of suffering. But thankfully, Buddha moves on to say, there is actually an end to this suffering. So the suffering can be eliminated. It doesn't mean that it's all hopeless. Life is all suffering and that's it. See you later. Buddha did not leave us like that. Some people think Buddhism is sort of negative. Why Buddha always talk about suffering. There's so much suffering, but there is also the happiness as well in life. Yes, Buddha does not deny that, but first, Buddha wants us to help us liberate from all sufferings in life so that we can be happy all the time. So we don't have to go through this sort of vicious cycle of being happy for this moment and then being upset, being suffered for the next moment, which is the cycle of reincarnation, the cycle of samsara. So Buddha wants to help us solve this problem once for all so that we can be happy all the time. That is why Buddhism is actually not a negative path. Buddha is very positive in that it helps us to solve perhaps the biggest problem in all our life. That is how to not suffer in life. So Buddha told us the suffering can be solved by following the Eightfold Path. And what's in the Eightfold Path? So the Noble Eightfold Path includes the right view, the right intention, the right speech, the right conduct, the right livelihood, the right effort, the right mindfulness, and the right concentration, which we will explain in our next video.